afternoon, good morning, and maybe even good evening to all our participants joining from all across Africa and beyond. My name is Joy Ruodo, and I'm the head of the Shared Value Africa Gender Equality Unit. And I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's African Universities Gender Equality Forum, as we tackle, of course, a very critical conversation on tech, power, and silence, addressing the issue of technology-facilitated abuse. Before we dive in, I would like to quickly go over some housekeeping rules to ensure a smooth and engaging session. So firstly, it's obviously a Zoom webinar, which means your cameras and microphones are off by default. But we do encourage you to engage and actively engage in the chat and in the Q&A features, submitting your questions for our panelists throughout the session. We also invite you to use the chat box to share your thoughts and your reflections and insights as we go along through the webinar, and also to engage with fellow attendees. If you have not already done so, I invite you to please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your title, your organization, or your university. Let us know where you're dialing in from today. Please note that the session is being recorded, and we will be sharing the link with all registered participants after today's session. We do want this to be an open, safe, and respectful space, so please keep your contributions constructive. Thank you so much again. I'd like to extend a special thanks to all of our partners, to all of our speakers, and most importantly to you, our incredible audience, for joining us. Before we begin, I would like to just start off with framing what we're here to discuss today. We confront what is a silent pandemic, technology-facilitated gender-based violence, or TFGBV. So while the digital revolution has connected us in unprecedented ways, it has also opened new avenues for abuse, for control, and for harassment. This issue is particularly critical in higher education, where young people, especially women, are at the forefront of the digital engagement. Research has shown that globally, more than 85% of women and girls have experienced or witnessed digital violence against other women. And in one study, which was on social media use in Nigeria, 71% of students reported being cyberbullied. And more recently, here in South Africa, it revealed that 63% had experienced online harassment. So this goes to show that it's not just a digital problem. And in fact, while we're talking about it, Tiki Barnard, who's our CEO, who's on the call at the moment, shared a story today, which is a very topical story and I think very timely, around the issue of the impacts that AI is having. And it was talking about a young lady who ended up actually committing suicide. And in fact, I saw the story shared by a psychologist just yesterday, talking about how the human cannot be replaced. And yet this young lady was having interactions with GPT, well, I can't say GPT, with AI, I don't know which AI platform, for quite some time, engaging with it on issues of challenges that she was encountering, issues of depression, and actually got to the point where she was sharing suicidal thoughts on the platform. And unfortunately, AI was unable to guide differently, and this young lady eventually actually committed suicide. So the reality is there are many ways in which we can be harmed by technology. And it's not just a digital problem, it's actually a profound social challenge that impacts us in our various spheres of life, including academic performance for students, including issues of mental health and issues of personal safety. So today we're here to break the silence, to explore how technology, which should be a tool for empowerment, is actually being weaponized. We'll discuss the power dynamics at play, and most importantly, identify actionable solutions. So as you listen today, I invite you to reflect. How has technology shaped your own sense of safety, of voice, and of dignity? I'd like to pause here and request that we start off with a poll. If you can assist me, please, the tech team, to launch the first poll. Thank you. And so the poll is now in the platform. How familiar are you with AI? Are you very familiar, somewhat familiar, or not familiar at all? I'll give you a minute or two to complete and submit your responses to the poll. Please engage. We are eagerly anticipating your responses to see how we're all interacting with AI at this stage. Giving a few more minutes, and thank you. I see people are introducing themselves in the chat. Welcome to those who joined a little bit later. We've got a poll online at the moment. Please go ahead and submit your response to the poll, and in a few seconds thereabouts, we will share the results of the poll. How familiar are you with AI? And talking about AI, I was sharing a story just for those who joined a little bit later about a topical story at the moment, which is regarding a lawsuit against an AI platform where a 16-year-old, on advice from an AI platform, actually committed suicide with guidance and advice from the platform on how to commit suicide. So these are some of the issues that we are facing real time. And let me know how you're interacting with AI. Tech, I think we can go ahead and let's see the responses. And there we go. So the feedback is overwhelmingly showing that we are all interacting with AI, very familiar with AI. Some are somewhat familiar, and a very small percentage not familiar at all with artificial intelligence. So I think it's very relevant that we have this conversation today. And without further ado, I would actually like to invite our next speaker, who will be kicking off this crucial discussion. We're really honored to welcome Prof. Anita Bosch, who's the Research Chair on Women at Work at Stellenbosch Business School. She will unpack how technology-facilitated GBV is reshaping power dynamics, its impact on students, and lessons that we can draw globally. She has 28 years of experience as a higher education leader in university and business school, and also exec education environments. And she has served in various roles in the private sector, teaching on leadership and on organizational behavior. And we're really delighted to have you on board. Prof. Anita, over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Joy, and the rest of the Shared Value Africa team. I'm really, really happy to be partnering with you on this particular project. And I'll be doing a short presentation really on technology and gender-based violence. I'm going to share that with you now. Right, and so what I wish to present to you is really the idea that with gender-based violence, we have technology as an additional way of facilitating it. But let's just quickly talk about gender-based violence in general on our continent. And we know that 42% of women experience physical or sexual violence. At least that's what's been reported in their lifetimes in Eastern and Southern Africa. And that only 37% of the sub-Saharan African countries have laws that govern sexual, psychological, and economic violence in general. So that's a very low percentage. Women and girls with disabilities are more likely to experience sexual violence. And I really want to point us to the very two last points over here. The importance of gender-based violence is that it not only, and it should not, firstly, it should not occur at all. But when it occurs, it doesn't just impact the individual. And there's various terms that can be used for that individual. Some people do not like the term the victim, right? So it's who it's been perpetrated onto. But what we know is that it also has implications for productivity, well-beings of families and communities, the individuals that witness it, that are the bystanders. It has a long-lasting impact. And that's why it's something that really, really should be eradicated completely. It also impedes women's participation in education and the labor market, and it costs economies up to 4% of GDP. Now, that's a massive amount in any country, and that is an estimate by the World Bank Group. I think more importantly, where does this come from? Where does sexual harassment come from on campuses? Now, a lot of it has to do with male-dominated cultures, and I want to say here, I'm not meaning for one moment it's men that only perpetrate this. And I want to be clear about it. Harassment happens the other way around as well. But in general, it is perpetrated from males to females. And males are often caught up in a male-dominated culture that demands of them a particular way of acting, and especially a particular way of dominating women and asserting their masculinity, which is hugely unfortunate, because what we know is that that is not true masculinity. On campuses, we see a lot of alcohol and drugs being used, and that often is abused then. And then the issue of social media, which today will receive a lot of attention. It's an unregulated space, more so now with the movements in the US, seems to be even more unregulated. And it allows for anonymous and unwanted expressions that can maintain these abusive patterns. There's also within education a double-edged sword, because education teaches us not to accept violence, but at the same time, when students come to campus, they very often, for the first time, out of their home environments where they may have been or received more protection, and therefore they are more vulnerable. I lastly just want to focus on patriarchy, power relations, and cultural and religious and social norms. For a lot of African women, for us, it means that we have to be submissive, and that that submission may mean that we also should just be accepting of violence that gets perpetrated onto us, which we know is wrong, but our cultural norms often reinforce this, and also religiously so. Those power relations feed in from patriarchy. So let me focus then on technology-facilitated gender-based violence. What is it that we're talking about today? It is really any form of gender-based violence that is committed, assisted, or aggravated through digital technology. And so it's any digital technology, such as our phones, our smartphones, social media, messaging apps, or any other online platform, and the AI platforms that Joy has referred to there. The AI is plugged into any and everything. And so AI feels like this big concept, but it really has been driving everything. In fact, AI was part of Word, you know, the program that we've been using for so many years. AI has already been part of that program for many, many years, where it makes auto suggestions for corrections, for instance. That's AI, right? So there's very many forms of AI. And so we're looking at technology facilitated gender-based violence today in terms of how technology facilitates it. It takes different forms. For instance, and I see somebody's been writing on the screen here, so I'll take that off just now. Things like cyber stalking and harassment or bullying, non-consensual image sharing, something such as revenge porn, the online threats and hate speech targeting gender and sexual identity. So lots of hate speech being spewed online because of this, the fact that people feel that they're anonymous. The impersonation or doxing, where your personal details are shared on platforms, especially on the internet, without your consent. And then digital surveillance and monitoring by intimate partners. With WhatsApp, for instance, this is very easy. They link in, you don't know that their device is active on your WhatsApp, and so they can monitor what it is that you're doing. In terms of the prevalence of gender-based violence, there's 1 in 3 women globally that have experienced online violence. There's also what we know in Central and Western African countries, 45% of adult women have said that they've experienced online gender-based violence. And I must say, I myself have received some hate mail from people because of the topics that I write on and so forth. Now, that is just for me harassment, but definitely unacceptable. And then South Africa ranks amongst the top 5 globally for cyber harassment against women. There's also young women, activists, journalists, and the LGBTQIA plus community that are at higher risk. And it has a lot of offline consequences. So once it's perpetrated, it continues. It doesn't just stop at the perpetration. Right. So we have here high student vulnerability, and unfortunately, this causes a lot of problems for us, such as, for instance, the fact that students, as I've said, are out of their home environments. But I want to say something about the online environment. Often, parents might think that their children are in their rooms, and even if you're a student staying at home or student staying at dormitory or wherever you may live, in that safe environment of your personal space, often what happens is the online enters into that. And so you are not safe because you're actually out in the ethers. You're busy connecting with people electronically elsewhere outside of the very safe environment that you may physically be finding yourself in. And with regards to that, I think that this is the biggest threat about technology-based, gender-based violence. Also, with student vulnerability, when students start having problems with their studies, or they may have relationship problems, often then it steps in that they want to use some type of platform and they want to connect with somebody. They may not have the funding to actually go to the student services. Most campuses have free student services, psychological services. Some campuses may not have the funding to do so. Some students may feel that they do not have the funding, or they're not aware of the services that are available, and so they reach out online. And this is where some of the harassment can take place. There's also an over-reliance on technology, because this is what we're working on. We're having a webinar here online, which we wouldn't have had 10 years ago, most probably. And so lots of power dynamics that happens gender relations wise, the same dynamics that play out in relationships when we one-on-one in person play out and get amplified online. The problem online is just with texting. You can't bring in body language. You cannot bring in all of the nuanced expressions that human beings share with each other. And so that makes it really, really tricky to interpret messaging. And sometimes that then sets off a spiral. And there's huge impact on students. It's emotional distress. There's lots of the academic disruption, and the fact that people drop out, and that has economic knock-on effects. There's safety concerns that you can be tracked where you go. There's a lot of apps that do tracking these days. And so you might be inadvertently tracked by somebody that you're not even aware of. And so always you have to go and check in all of your apps who else is logged on at the same time as what you are. And then also, I've mentioned this before, technology-facilitated gender-based violence just continues with the pounding that you might have received if you were in an abusive relationship. Physically, it continues. It may also ruin your reputation, outside of the campus life. So combating technology-facilitated gender-based violence is really a new area for campuses to deal with. Universities may have policies and frameworks already that deal with gender-based violence, although some are even slow on the uptake of that. There are various digital tools that are available, and on the next slide, I'm going to look at a few others. UCT, for instance, has anonymous reporting and survivor support. UJ has an internal GBV reporting system. I'm going to look at some others in other parts of Africa soon. Sonke Gender Justice has modules on training, and there's in general, as I previously mentioned, support services. However, there are many, many gaps. And some of these gaps relate purely just in terms of information sharing. Do students know about these apps that may be available, the services that are available? Many students, SRC, Student Representative Council members, don't even know about it and have to be informed. There's also got to be a lot of inclusivity. It needs to include men and women and all other vulnerable groups, such as the LGBTQIA plus groupings and so on. Funding, and this is something that we always need. This we've got to scale and evaluate the tech tools, first evaluate them and then scale them, and then also make sure that we target technology facilitated GBV specifically, because this is a separate area and lots of research that's needed in this area. So what other technology apps are available also other than the UCT and UJ platforms that I've spoken about? There's various technology, and I've done a quick search, but I must say the search for technology-aided platforms in other African countries are few. I found Nokaneng in Lesotho, which is an app that women with a panic button where you can report GBV. The Break the Silence is a Nigerian NGO that does fantastic work. It has a podcast, a Facebook platform, and it works with religious partners and so forth to break the silence on destigmatizing social issues. And then there's YouReport, which is in Uganda. It's a social messaging tool and a data collection system as well. In South Africa and more broadly, there's Bright Sky South Africa, and Chomi, which are available and gives people an opportunity to actually report gender-based violence. In conclusion, we're not aware of the scale of GBV. Because as you know, most of you in the audience would know, it doesn't get reported. We often don't report it. And that's where these apps come in to make it safer to report. Universities do realize the severity of the issue, but some of them are sort of paralyzed and don't know what to do. Some have started moving down the line with policy frameworks and so forth. Technology facilitated GBV needs specific protective measures, and that has really not yet been developed on campuses. And then there are certain apps, but they are not campus specific, except the UCT one, and UJ has another platform, and they are often under advertised. As I've said in my research for this presentation, I could not find many for other parts of Africa, for instance. I'm going to stop here and I'll hand back to Joy. Thank you very much, Joy.
Thank you so much, Prof. Anita. Really appreciate that those insights. I mean, it's a powerful framing. I think you've given us quite a lot to think about, from the scale of the issue globally right through to the deep personal impact that this issue has on students and on communities. So it made me wonder a question before I release you. You spoke quite a bit about what institutions are doing, gave some really valuable ideas and suggestions. And we will later on have a panel of students who will be sharing their insights. And I wondered, in your experience, what role do you think students themselves should be playing in shaping a safer digital environment on campus?
Yeah, and I think this is something that takes a lot of work, takes a lot of practice. However, it's quite doable. It's really actually quite quickly doable. And this has to do with being a bystander. So when you're a bystander witnessing something happening, what should you do? Now, if your life is directly threatened by the action. Let's say we take it offline now, we don't take it off online, we take it offline, and you are physically being attacked by somebody, then clearly you're not necessarily going to, step up, because you yourself might lose your life. When we speak about online, often it is that you are in a position to step up, because you're not physically in proximity of the individual doing the attacking. And just as that individual is attacking, one can be really specific about pointing out behavior that is inappropriate. So we can't go back and try and fight fire with fire. And I would not advise anybody to try and use superlatives and, shout at a person online, but really just to speak up and say, this behavior is not appropriate. What you're doing is X. You're harassing, or you're stigmatizing, or whatever it may be, and then step back, because you are going to get backlash on whatever that person is doing, because they in a rage of a fit of rage at that moment. But don't step back into it. You've done your bit there. Once one person speaks up, we often have followers that then come in and support. And with group behavior, this is really, really important. If you have one disruptive person, if you can turn the rest of the group on the disruptive person, then you diminish the power of the disruptive person. And online, this is actually quite easy, because you're not physically going to be harmed. There's other situations where people continue to perpetrate, and there definitely one has to start legal action has to start stepping in and so forth. Or even just mentioning to somebody, do you know that you can be legally prosecuted for what you're busy with now? And usually that also makes a person that's perpetrating the harassment think twice. So it's really important for us to, as bystanders, step up. When we see it happening, we have to address it immediately.
That is so brilliant. Thank you for that response. And as I was thinking about what you were sharing, we're talking today about that intersection of power, technology, and gender violence. And I think what you've just done in a few words is remind us that actually we also have some power, which we can take back. And so I love that concept of becoming more active bystanders, because we all have a role to play when we see someone at the receiving end of these kinds of violations. So thank you so much for those practical steps that I think students and even us in the working world, what we can be doing to be more active bystanders. Really appreciate it, Prof. Anita. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. It was lovely being with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Prof. Before we move on to our next segment, I would love for us to take another pause, have a dipstick poll, and then we can continue with our next set of speakers. So Tech, if you can assist me, and we have our poll up. Which form of technology facilitated abuse do you think is most common in African universities? Cyberbullying or harassment, non-consensual image sharing, or online stalking? So have a look at that. Please submit your response. We're eager to hear from you. Which form of technology facilitated abuse do you think is most common in African universities? The options are cyberbullying or harassment, non-consensual image sharing, or online stalking. Please submit your response and we will see what the poll says in a moment. Giving you a few more moments to submit your responses. And there we have it. So it looks quite interesting. So a number of people have said cyberbullying or harassment, and that's coming in at 39%. But we also have non-consensual image sharing actually taking lead at 46%. And then we have online stalking at 15%. And the picture that this tells is that the various forms of technology facilitated abuse are alive and well and thriving within our institutions. And very likely, most people on this platform have experienced one or more of those forms of violence and harassment. So thank you so much for participating in the poll. Up next, we're going to have our expert panel bringing practical perspectives from legal, faith-based, and private sector spaces related to technology-facilitated gender-based violence on campus and in the working world. I encourage you all to share your questions via the chat or the Q&A function as we proceed. And so to start off, I'm going to ask our panelists to provide their opening insights, and then we'll open the floor for an interactive discussion. Each of our panelists will have 3 to 4 minutes to share their opening insights. And to start off, I would like to welcome and introduce Achieng Orero, who's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya with a law degree from the University of Nairobi, a postgrad diploma from the Kenya School of Law, and a master's in international law from Loyola University in Chicago. She has extensive experience with women's rights stemming from her work in various organizations, and she's currently the Violence Against Women thematic lead at ISLA. She's worked as a senior attorney at Women's Link Worldwide. Achieng, I hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Joy. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about this really interesting and concerning really topic. So to start off, I'd like also to thank Professor Anita. Her presentation speaks to a lot of what I was going to share, particularly the manifestations and how the various forms of violence occur online. But I'd like to start by stating that while we think kind of online violence is limited to the online sphere, what we've witnessed is that violence very easily translates to offline violence and has real and tangible kind of effects on women and girls across the continent. So when we think about TFGBV, online violence, however you want to call it, a lot of times we make the mistake of thinking that, you know, it's just online, your name is being aligned to the online sphere or the online ether and doesn't have any real life tangible effects. I'd like to come against that thought and say the actual real life online effects of the violence, real life offline effects of the violence that women face online. So mine was just to speak about the legal and policy framework that we have on the continent. And I'd like to say, you know, the law often responds to what happens. It often develops as a response to what's going on. And so when we had the conceptualization of the different legal frameworks that talk about violence against women from the 70s and the 80s and so on and so forth, those not are thinking of the online sphere. The World Wide Web, or the internet as we come to know it, has continually evolved and is a consequence of technology evolving, as we have seen. And we've even talked about like AI, which is an even different animal all by itself. And so the law is like quickly running to catch up with these developments in technology. However, the laws that we have are broad enough that even though they don't speak specifically to the cyber related crimes and the online violence that women face, the laws are broad enough that they do offer some type of protection. So I'll talk about 3 specific laws. So we have the African Charter on People and Human Rights. People call it the African Charter or the Banjul Charter. It has a number of human rights that guarantee safety, that guarantee freedom from violence. It talks about equality. It talks about non-discrimination. It talks about a life that is free from violence, and correspondingly, the obligation of states, like countries, must take and make sure they put in place all appropriate measures, every measure that they can take to ensure that women are free from violence. Secondly, we have what we call popularly the Maputo Protocol. And the Maputo Protocol is so interesting because it speaks specifically about the rights of women and girls. The entire law is just about the rights of women and girls on the continent. Apologies if you're hearing some loud laughter next to me. There are people who are having a good time and we love them for that. But the Maputo Protocol, as I was saying, also speaks about women and girls on the continent, their right to live free from violence, and then also most importantly, what states must do to make sure that this is a reality for women and girls across the continent. States must take administrative measures, legal measures, policy measures, training, community sensitization, looking at changing attitudinal norms, behavioral norms, cultural norms, repealing laws or amending laws that are against, the issues of equality for women, non-discrimination, removal of violence against women as well, in all the manners in which violence manifests. So that would include, in my considered view, online violence as well. And then we have this most recent law, which is the AU, the Africa Union Convention on Ending All Forms of Violence Against Women and Girls. This is a fairly new law that just came out this year, I think around February or March or April thereabout. So on the one hand, this is kind of the first law we have across the continent that talks about the elimination of violence specifically. The Maputo Protocol is broad. It talks about all manner of things, widows, inheritance, marriage, violence. But then the Convention on Ending Violence is a convention specifically about violence. So while this is a good thing, we have our reservations against the law. So first of all, it talks about cyberspace, and it kind of categorizes cyberspace as this third sphere. So there's the public sphere, private sphere, and then cyberspace as a third sphere. It doesn't go, in my opinion, far enough to kind of define what violence against women on cyberspace looks like. It doesn't give any of the manifestations. It doesn't talk about specific state obligations. It doesn't talk about kind of the responsibility of the technology, the platforms themselves, because while we have like the state's overall responsibility, there is a responsibility of the technological platforms themselves as well to ensure that the spaces are free from violence, they are safe for all people to exist, there are consequences and immediate like removal for perpetrators or people who go against community guidelines and things like that. So the AU convention, while it's, it categorizes cyberspace as a sphere in which women face violence, in my considered view, does not go far enough to guarantee the specific protections and then the specific obligations of the state that we're looking for. When we look at what is the institutional responsibility of universities, given that these are the laws that exist. Oh, sorry, I also wanted to mention, over and above like the regional landscape and laws that we have, there are specific countries, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, that have started to do a little bit of legislation and policy that look at, cyberspace. So we have laws that prohibit like sharing of images or fake images in South Africa. In Kenya, we have laws that look at cyber crimes specifically, and so on and so forth. So when we look at now universities, what's their institutional responsibility? Their responsibility is one, also to come up with their own kind of policy, like Professor Anita was talking about, modeled on these international, regional, and national laws that exist. They have a responsibility to take on the human rights-based approach, where women are supposed to be equal, they're supposed to have a right to equality, a right to non-discrimination, a right to live free from violence in all its forms, right? Institutions also must take a zero tolerance approach, right, in dealing with technologically facilitated violence or gender-based violence. And then there's measures that they can put in place. So there's measures like having clear reporting mechanisms, who do you go to, where do you go to, whether in the event that you experience this violence, there must be clear consequences. Yeah,
Sorry,
is my
can
timer?
I interject a little bit? Simply because
Sure.
The direction you're going, there's actually a question in the chat, which I'd love to pose to you, but I'd also love to give an
Okay.
opportunity to the other panelists to jump in. So if you can
Okay.
start thinking ahead, the question that has been
Sure.
popped into the chat is, who's responsible for preventing and stopping technology-facilitated gender-based violence? And how do we hold them accountable? And I love that you are touching on the African Union Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, something that we as Shared Value actually participated in that we hosted the private sector consultation for that particular convention. So I'd love you to start thinking about this. And as you do so, it gives me great pleasure to welcome on board our next speaker, who's Prof. Dr. Sarah Kwagala Kasozi, from the faith-based perspective, and she's a multifaceted expert in child and family development, dedicated to creating safe and empowering environments for young people. As a renowned child and family counselor, she's an advocate, a mentor, a coach, and she spent many years championing the rights and well-being of children and families in Uganda. So Prof. Dr. Sarah, can I invite you to take stage and share your opening remarks in just 3 to 4 minutes, because we'd love to spend the bulk of the time having conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you so much for this opportunity to serve with you, to walk this journey with you as we address gender-based violence. And it's a blessing to be here. Yes, I'm coming from the faith-based organizations. And before we go any further, my opening remarks are that yes, faith-based organizations are here to support girls, to support women, to support the men, to support society, to fight gender-based violence. However, not every faith-based organization is good enough for you to approach. It's good for every university student out there to actually understand where they are going to, what kind of institution do you want to support you, where are you going, have you heard about these people, have you done a background check? Because now in this generation where we have so many organizations coming out in the name of faith-based or any kind of faith, and you don't know their beliefs, you don't know their picture, it's wise to first understand who they are and what are their values. So I wanted to put that as a disclaimer as we begin to talk about faith-based organizations and how they can support survivors of gender-based violence. So as faith-based organizations, of course, we are right here for every university student. And most universities have a system. Most universities have organizations around them. I would give an example of Makerere University here in Uganda, where you would find there is a St. Francis's Chapel and there is St. Augustine's Chapel, a system that supported us back then when we were still at university and stood firmly with us to support us through our challenges, where we used to discuss different issues and challenges that we used to meet as university students. So when you are in the university, many young people want to stand alone. They want to be all alone. They want to isolate themselves, but we need a support system. And every young person has an affiliation to a particular faith. So for that faith where you belong, look for a support system within that school. If you believe in them, it is wise and good enough for you to join them, in that when you meet a challenge, whether it's technology-based or any other challenge that may affect you as a human being, it is good to share with somebody, which is also very therapeutic. Thank you for that. That is my introduction. I'll be waiting to continue with that. To give me a few minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And yes, we'll definitely be digging into questions. And I encourage all of the participants to please, I see some questions are popping into the chat. Please continue, because this conversation is not a one-sided conversation. We did not intend by any means to come and have a lecture today. We wanted to have dialogue. So I encourage you to please continue to put your questions and your reflections in the chat, and we'll definitely address those to our speakers. Thank you again, Prof. Dr. Sarah. It gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome our next speaker, who's no stranger to the Shared Value Africa platforms. And I'd like to welcome Dumiso Mgomezulu, who's a seasoned marketing and corporate affairs director who, oh, apologies, I didn't realize my video was off. So just welcoming Dumiso Ngomezulu, who's a seasoned marketing and corporate affairs director, who has built an intersectional career helping businesses drive profitability while also shaping social impact. His expertise spans across brand marketing, corporate affairs, strategic communications, and public policy, very deeply involved in stakeholder engagement with a proven track record across FMCG and financial services, telecoms, and government sectors. Dumiso, I'd like to welcome you and open up for you to share your opening remarks.
Thank you very much for having me on the webinar, and I'm looking forward to this interactive discussion that you're going to have. Perhaps my opening remarks, so that we, maybe short and sweet, so that we are able to dive into the belly of the discussion with the questions, really centers around this intersectionality of responsibility. For the longest of time, I guess responsibility has always been relegated to some extent a regulatory environment that ought to set the way or chart the path in able to deal with harms. But I suppose my remarks and conversation today looks at this, I call it a triage of business, society, and politics. And at the intersection of that, when those three tend to work together, certainly there normally is a better forms of solutions that are found. What has become a lot more interesting in my work, particularly championing purpose-led brands and businesses that seek to either compete on social purpose or seek to solve social challenges, it has been the understanding that in fact, anybody can take the lead on solving social challenges. What becomes pertinent in taking the lead is then obviously keeping the gateways and pathways open for other individuals to come in. I suppose that's the first set of remarks, is to say that I think the playing field is broad enough for us to understand that anyone really can take the lead. And certainly that from a private sector point of view, there is a need for that. And my remarks may certainly lead towards a private sector. Perhaps that's where I've got most of the experience and a track record in being able to use brands to solve these challenges. My second set of remarks, being mindful of time, really center around understanding this issue, of technology power, and technology facilitated abuse from a brand lens point of view. And in my last work environment, I was leading corporate affairs, brand and communications for Avon in Southern Africa and the rest of Africa. And one of the key things that potentially came out is the need for brands such as an Avon, such as beauty-led industries and other industries to take the charge, because ultimately these are our consumers who are affected by technology facilitated abuse online. And beauty becomes an interesting world to look at gender-based violence, and from a technology point of view, and perhaps what type of stereotypes, what type of narratives we form, in the way in which we advertise and we put standards of beauty that may lead to these harassments. And we heard the types of harassments that are there. And I'm going to close my remarks in that outside of me working in the private sector, I also tend to be I'm a broadcaster, and in one of the ways in which in my broadcasting life, this topic has become pertinent. Recently, we explored a conversation around a very simple term, slay queens, and how narratives shape realities, and how these realities end up distorting how women, men, or anybody who these narratives are for, how their lives tend to translate. And we delved into conversations around online harassment through terms that may at origination may have been terms that didn't mean and had no harm to them, but certainly over time have found some level of negative connotations to them. And we then tend to label them on certain individuals, whether for harm or no harm. The unintended consequences become adverse. And such harassments, land themselves in very interesting ways. I mean, one of the callers talked about how difficult it was for them, having been labeled like this for a period of time. And she's a and a very known influencer, is that when she tried to get into the world of work, nobody would take her seriously because of the harms that online individuals or online users had perpetuated against her, and how they've labeled her and harassed her indirectly, and it formed narratives around certain individuals. So I think that what is important, I suppose, in my remarks, is that on the one set is that there's a triage and everybody can take a lead in playing in this space, particularly to solve from a harm point of view, whether you're in business, society, or in politics or government halls. There's a place for you to play, and even better when these three sector actors work together. Particularly, I do think that brands have got a place to play, and I've seen how I've done it through, beauty brands like Avon and financial services. And, underpinning all of this is the responsibility that we share as individuals in how we communicate and talk to each other online, and how these ways in which we engage each other tend to shape narratives that can become harmful for a set of individuals, whether it's gendered or not. It has got lived realities and experiences for individuals. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I love that concept of the intersectionality of responsibilities, because I think you're quite right. And it touches on a question that was raised earlier on, in fact, in the chat, which said, and I'm just scrolling up to it, I think the question spoke about who is responsible. And I'm just trying to locate it, if you give me a moment, but it spoke about who is responsible. While I get to it, I just want to go to a question which I thought was quite a provocative question, and I think might be an interesting place to start. And the question that was in the chat was, why does it seem as if GBV is becoming one-sided? Is a male protected from GBV? No one ever talks about the female prisons all over the world. So I thought that was a rather interesting perspective, and it speaks to a tendency which I don't think we can deny, which is that we very often, when we think of a perpetrator, we have a certain gender in mind. But the reality is that anyone can be a victim and anyone can be a perpetrator. So I'd love to lean in and hear if our panelists have any thoughts on that, because I feel like of all of the questions that have been shared thus far, that is the elephant in the room at the moment. So any one of you who's feeling ready to take on that question, please do. And then we'll move on to a couple of other questions shared in the chat.
Okay, may I come in first?
Please do.
Okay, please. Well, it's very good that men are standing out right now and wanting to get support from society, because, over time, men have wanted to be strong, capable. Patriarchy has been reigning on top, especially in Africa, where we are, because over time, men did not want support, even though they were going through a very hard time. We had people saying around us, men do not cry, men do not shout out, men do not need support, men do not get sick, they do not get hungry, they do not get what? So now we have realized they also need our support. But in Uganda here, we are seeing organizations come up that are supporting men as well. We are seeing organizations, even the National Lottery has stood out and brought up programs that are saying the voice of the men, support for the men. Churches also are standing out and saying, who is talking to the boy child? Who is now talking to the boy child? And of course, we'd also recognize that right now, even when you look at the picture of families, the university students that we have are actually in a position whereby they've not seen a father figure in their lives. The men have been running away and they've not been carrying on their responsibility. And they've been responsible for so many gender-based violence cases. So now that they also realize that, yes, this hurts, this pains, this is not good for me, I think they'll also rise up and say, we can also talk to the other men out there that are doing it. Because when you look at statistics, it's mostly men that are actually committing these offenses. And yes, we want to support the men. When you go to police and report the cases, here we have the department at police that is supporting men, child and family department. The police is working hard to support the men. Recently, we're having a meeting with the probation and welfare officer here in Kampala. And she was saying that when you report a case of child support, even the woman is responsible. Things have changed over time. So yes, we want to recognize the fact that men too can be abused, men too can be going through very hard times, but we want to also stand with the men and say, do not keep quiet. Do not keep quiet. We are here to support you. Look for the safe spaces. Ask for help when you need it, report when something happens to your friend or partner, request for help. We are here to help you. And of course, us as the actors, the different actors that are right here on this platform, we are a voice that is going to go out there and speak to others, raise awareness, and let others know that both men and women, all of them, all people need to be supported. When it comes to gender-based violence, every human being needs support. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I feel like perhaps the next logical question to go to is one that was addressed to Achiyeng, because we are talking now about not necessarily looking at it from a gender perspective, but recognizing that males and females can be victims and perpetrators. So having said that, Achiyeng, the question that was raised in the chat is, how can students practically access justice when the abuse happens online and, importantly, it's also taking place across borders?
Yeah, thank you for that. And the interesting discussion. I just want to briefly add on to what Sarah was saying right before, and the question right before, and then get into the cross-border question. The reality is that, yes, while all people are affected, all genders are affected by violence, either male or female, the reason why it seems that there's a larger response to protect women is just because of the sheer numbers. Professor Anita's presentation highlighted that. The statistic she gave was 1 in 3, right? That means if you're sitting in a room that has 3 women, at least one of them has gone through some form of harassment or violence, both online and offline. So I think that's why the focus has been on eliminating violence, just because of the prevalence and the incidences. When it comes to the question around what steps can students take when the violence is cross-border, now this is the problem that we face when we look at the internet and social media. The borders are not physical, as offline violence or other forms of crime tend to happen. They're not confined to a physical space. The person could be wherever. There's even anonymity that happens. You can take on pseudonyms. You can hide your physical address. There's so many ways that the internet can be used to perpetrate harm. So one of the ways I think, and this points to Ndomiso's points earlier, is now this is where the social media platforms actually have a role to play. They must be proactive in identifying these risks, because the platforms on social media have been used and the internet have been used to recruit and recruit victims for even things such as human trafficking, slave auctions and stuff like that. Like, extremely horrific things can happen through the internet. So I think there's the first responsibilities on the social media platforms themselves to be actively identifying and responding to these risks. We use the regulations that make it so that anonymity is not used as a shield or a spear to hide perpetrators' intentions and all of that. But then I think there's a huge value in documenting the instances, documenting what response was taken and whether the response was given was adequate. So we have to have enough information out there of, okay, these are the incidences, this is how it's happening, this what happened, and this is where we reported, either using the community regulations. And if the response wasn't adequate, then that forms a very good platform for an access to justice action or a claim, either at a regional court. We have a really good decision that came from the African Commission of a lady who was trafficked from Kenya to Namibia and was recruited on Facebook. So, there are possibilities. It's just we have to be able to, unfortunately, the burden lies on the victim to document where the violations occurred. And then after the response was given by the social media platform, if it was insufficient, we can now take steps for legal action. Back to you, Joy.
Thank you so much for that. And you actually touched on another question that was raised. So I'm glad you digressed in that direction, which was the issue of there's so many cases of online harassment, but they go unaddressed by the tech platforms themselves. So I love the fact that you're already speaking about the fact that they need to be playing a role and that they also need to be held accountable. Which then leads me to the next question. And I think, Dumiso, this will be targeted at you, and mostly because of the suggestion that you made about how it's an intersectionality of responsibility. And you spoke about business, you spoke about society, and you spoke about politics. And there's a question in the chat now. It says, if institutions and law enforcement are unfamiliar with or unaware of the terms and concepts such as technology-facilitated gender-based violence, or even online coercion, what steps can be taken to address this issue? What actions can we take to make progress? And if there are no policies in place, what measures should we implement? And I think this speaks to business, as you mentioned, it speaks to politics, as you mentioned, and I think it also speaks to society. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that question. And without particularly perhaps being long-winded in my response to it, before I answer it, I think the position in which the question again is written, it's written with the view that there ought to be a person taking the charge or an institution solving for this. It negates the intersectionality that we are talking about and the fact that the sandpit, if you're to call it, or the playing field, allows for everybody to be able to take lead. If there are no policies in place, law enforcement may not fully understand the role of the harms of social platforms, but society can already see it. Then society ought to take the lead in being able to raise these harms sufficiently so that those who have the power or institutional power to effect change through policy, regulation, etc., are able to see this and fast track this. I think when we fully first understand this social media, digital media, online spaces, not as technology, because when we understand it as technology, we perhaps understand it as a tool to do certain things or a or infrastructure. But if you see it as a cultural space in which people exist in, the framing and understanding of this space becomes different. We all own spaces that we're in, and a cultural space or a cultural space shapes norms, shapes viewpoints and how we behave around each other. So it allows for anyone to be able to take the lead. And of course, to what extent can certain individuals lead to a point where real change is effected? That perhaps maybe becomes the conversation at how fast does the regulatory environment change in order to meet with the demands of social spaces? To what extent does business invest behind creating or reducing harm? That perhaps becomes the question. But from the vantage of who is responsible and who ought to educate, anybody who's got the information, because we're about creating culturally safe space. But this also doesn't negate the fact that social media companies in themselves cannot remain neutral because their platforms perpetuate harms. I think a good example would be recently what we saw happening within the and I'm not sure how far this conversation extended on the continent, but having very influential young women becoming targets of human trafficking, but by influencing or promoting programs that purport to be of social value, but they're actually in the belly of them are around slave trade. In that instance, you had society, you had people within social media coming forward to say, no, this does not look legitimate. And it led into media investigations. And eventually we saw that, that particular program within the Russian community that was being purported to be a social impact program actually wasn't. But we haven't heard from the tech platforms themselves on what they do to moderate content like that, to make sure content like that is removed fast, is moderated fast before actually making it onto timelines, and to the extent in which the algorithm shows it and extends it to other individuals. In instances like that, then we hold tech companies to account, and we say then they need to be able to be more stringent. But this particular example in itself shows you the power of the intersectionality. It was society who saw the error and flaw. The conversation then blew up, media amplified the conversation, which then allowed for proper investigation to go in place. And now the question becomes, what are tech companies going to be doing around the moderation of content that becomes harmful in those particular spaces? And I hope I did justice to your question but expanding the fact that there is collective responsibility that sits here and we can't run from it.
Absolutely. And I think you're leading me on to something else that I wanted us to touch on. So we've spoken a lot about, what business should be doing, what government should be doing, what should be happening at the regulatory space. But I think we haven't really dug in enough on the issue of what society should be doing. And society indeed has a role to play, as you say. And I loved what you shared earlier on, Dumiso, when you spoke about the issue of slay queens and how narratives shape realities. And so I wanted to talk about a question that was raised in the chat, which says, how can we actually change on the grounds and within societies the mindset that minimizes online violence and just sees it as a mere annoyance? And I want to straddle the line a little bit here, because I think on the African continent, beyond it just being viewed as a mere annoyance, there's also the issue of violence and harassment on the basis of our races, ethnic origin, our religions, our cultures, and the line goes further and further. So I wanted to rehash this question, and this is open to any one of our panelists. How can we actually start to change within our societies, societal thinking, so that we don't minimize online violence and just look at it as mere annoyance? And the typical actual response is victim blaming. What did you do? What made you attract this to you? Over to our panelists.
Okay, can I go first again?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Well, society is us. We are the society, all of us, every human being. And now that we are talking about the young people, especially the young people in the universities, we are looking at how best we can support them, and we are not going to be blaming anybody, doing the blame game that you are responsible, I'm responsible, why did this happen? Because when it does happen, it affects all of us. I would give an example of a young lady years back who had a relationship with a particular young man, and one day she just found all pictures of herself, nude pictures all over social media, and the only support system she had was her family. Her father stood with her all those years. It was back then in 2017. And right now, the young lady is married off because the father stood, and society stood because the father stood. So all of us, we are responsible when we come to that. But as players, as actors, what can we do? First, can we create safe spaces? If we can put it in our mind and say that I am responsible to see that it is well, it starts with us. Facebook may never do it, Twitter may never do it, LinkedIn may never do it, but it's me and you because we own the spaces, like one of us already shared. It's us who have accounts on those platforms. So we are responsible to create a safe space for everybody that is around us, to see that people are well. And being actors as organizations, civil society organizations, we are the people in the social spaces, the faith-based organizations. We are there to make that differences, to bring that change in society. So provide the safe space. If someone is going through a hard time, if they go into cyberbullying, who is counseling them? Are they meeting anybody to help them? Do we have para-counselors? Do we have social workers that can support in this? Are we having people in place? Can we take them to professionals that can support them to heal if they are distressed, if they're going through a depression because something happened? That is also very important. Then as people that are into that space, do we have resources in place? Do we know where to point to if they need the resources? Where can they go for the support, for the help when they do need it. So we must understand, yes, these things happen, and there is need to bridge the gap between patriarchy and what is happening right now, because how best can we educate our society? How best can we talk to our mothers, our fathers, our grandparents that yes, there is a difference right now. The trends are changed. Things are not the same like they used to be back then. But yes, we can carry on the values of our culture, but we can change a few things here and there to support the young people of this generation. We don't have to be rigid. And so we are the voice that is going to be able to speak, to change, to break the chains of patriarchy, to support women and men, to support the young ladies. And yes, we have a voice of the men shouting out, but they are minority. The majority are girls being abused every day or being asked for sexual practice when they switch on their phones. And it's happening everywhere in university. The men that are calling them every night. We have a few men that are going through this, but the women are struggling. They are suffering every day. So there is need. And then the other thing is, even as we are speaking to the university students right now, they have nieces, they have sisters, they have relatives. The point is, how can we promote healthy relationships? And I'll start with the young lady that is here, the young man that is right here. You are the one going online and saying, yes, I want a relationship online. How much do you know this person? So it starts with us. Is this person reflecting your values? Do you really have to walk a distance to go meet a stranger to start a relationship? If they are calling you for a relationship online, what are the costs involved? So we need to understand and measure up, because if we do not measure this, then they are going to weigh down on us. And it's up to us that have learned it to go and train even the kids down there, the young girls and boys down there, that relationships are built. They are built over time. They are not created in a minute. And so you cannot just give away your trust to a stranger online that you do not understand, but you take time to understand who they are. Are they valid? Are they going through the right channel? Whom am I giving my number to? Whose profile am I going, whom am I sending this friend request to? So those details are very necessary when we want to emphasize that. Then the other thing is encouraging reporting.
I apologize. I'm going to have to cut you short, only because I'm looking at our time and you've got such a wealth of content to share. But we also have a panel of students that are going to come on board shortly. So I think how we're going to do it, if I can request your indulgence to our panelists, because you have a wealth of insights. There have been so many conversations taking place in the chat, so many questions asked in the chat. If you can take a moment to try and respond to as many of those as you can, I would be most grateful. But I would like to give some time to Ndumiso and Achieng before we close up, if they can share their parting thoughts, and then we can move on to the student panel. Ndumiso, can I start with you?
Yes, that's fine. Quite quickly, I suppose, just building on the conversation that we've had. And I've said this, that language shapes reality. And I think that to some extent, I sometimes, maybe wrongfully so, blame, maybe not blame, but apportion some of the challenges that we face in terms of language to even academic institutions, but not because it's intended, because they are trying to understand a phenomena and they come up with terminology, but that terminology becomes the lexicon in which we use. So when we call it online harm, cyberbullying, or even locally when we just call it trolling or different terms that we derive from ways in which we're understanding phenomena, it does create emotional distance from the actual experience of survivors, and therefore to some extent minimizes the reality that they're living through. I've always wondered, we call it gender-based violence. It actually is abuse. It is murder. It's not gender-based violence-led femicide, or however we call it, to try and sound politically right. It's abuse. We take away the gravity of the crime or the gravity of the action, and create distance emotionally, which becomes hard for people to sometimes, or maybe leads to the victim blaming, because when somebody's murdered in cold blood, they're murdered in cold blood. It's not because it's sensitized and so on. So I really think that the role that we also ought to play collectively is not to create that emotional distance. Let's make sure we call it for what it is and actually give it the gravity that it requires, so that we actually understand the actual effects that we are faced with and the gravity of the situations that we are faced with. And then lastly, I do think that in institutions like universities, as university students, you are at the heart of where this knowledge and research and understanding of phenomena are. So you have almost the responsibility, but also the privilege of being able to shape these narratives as these research papers come out, as seminars are put in place where these phenomena and social phenomena is unpacked, to be able to say, hey, we hear it, but when you term it this is how a person in the street will understand it. In understanding it this way, it creates these unintended consequences, and we can't afford to do that. Let's find other terms to call it so that we do not minimize the lived experience of the survivor, and we keep the survivor at heart, so that people are emotionally connected to the things and the harms that are in place. So let's not call it cyberbullying or drama, or trivialize it to, oh, it's just kids being kids, or social media problems. Let's call it what you'd call it in somewhere else. It is verbal abuse, and call it that, so that the gravity of it brings that emotional connection closer to the survivor. And the reaction society has is not just outrage for the sake of outrage. It's because we understand the impact of what is being done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Geez, powerful closing remarks from you. I feel like it's an amen moment. And I want to hand over the baton to Achiyeng to share your parting remarks.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Just in closing, speaking right up from where Dumiso left off, and tying back to where I started, is that the consequences of the violence that women and girls face online is real and tangible. The effects are not, confined to the online space. They have real life and tangible effects on people's lives. And so for me, my parting shot is threefold. There are responsibilities that governments must take. There are responsibilities that the social media platforms themselves must take. And then there are responsibilities that the universities must take. And then I think it's important to frame it in that way, so that we also move away from blaming the victim, as we were saying earlier. We move away from placing the responsibility of, like, your safety is your responsibility. Well, yes, there are things you can do to make sure that you're safe online. And, there are many trainings about how to stay safe, how to, avoid being catfished and being all of these things. But then ultimately, for me, from the legal perspective, the responsibility lies with the online platforms, and the responsibility also lies with the government to keep people safe, to uphold their rights, and to be in line with all the legal and policy frameworks that we have regionally and nationally. So social media platforms must proactively be identifying and responding to risks. They must put in place community guidelines that, are effectively responding to threats as they arise. They must deprioritize, or, even shut off platforms or groups or communities that spew rhetoric that is harmful. And then finally, universities must also have real and tangible responses and responsibility when it comes to responding to violence and supporting victims as and when the violence occurs. So thank you very much, and back to you, Joy.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our experts for the insightful comments and contributions that you've made today. Really, really appreciated, and welcome your recommendations that you've shared. I've been so thankful, and I need to acknowledge all of our participants for the interaction and the engagement in the chat platform. I encourage you to continue with that. Please do not stop, because we're moving on to the next stage of the discussion. Ultimately, really, this forum is about centering student voices. Their lived realities often get left out of policy discussions. And so we want to turn to our student panel before we run out of time today, and they'll be sharing candid reflections on how technology-facilitated abuse has impacted them and their peers and their visions for safer campuses. But before we do that, if we can just have a quick poll, and then we'll move on to the student panel. And the next poll is, what is the biggest barrier to addressing technology-facilitated gender-based violence on campus? What is the biggest barrier to addressing tech-facilitated GBV on campus? Weak legal protections, lack of awareness or reporting systems, victim-blaming culture, tech platforms not taking responsibility, or other? Please go ahead and submit your response. What is the biggest barrier to addressing tech-facilitated GBV on campus? Is it weak legal protections? Is it lack of awareness or reporting systems? Is it the victim-blaming culture? Or is it tech platforms that are not taking responsibility? Or maybe it's other. Please submit your response and let's see what the outcome is. And there we have it. Resounding 68% feedback saying that lack of awareness or reporting systems is the biggest barrier in addressing tech-facilitated GBV. So I think today is a great start, the fact that we're having these conversations and bringing this issue to light. So without further ado, joining us are 4 incredible student leaders from across the continent, and I stand corrected, I think one may have had to drop off, but I want to welcome our young leaders. And I'd like to start by asking each of you to share your opening thoughts or remarks. What does the theme of tech power and silence mean to you personally? And what are some of the lived realities that you and your peers are facing on campus? If you can please keep your remarks to 3 to 4 minutes so that we can spend more time engaging with the audience, just like we've done now. And to start off, I'd like to introduce Tizo Hove, who's an honor student in politics at Rhodes University with a strong academic interest in political economy, youth participation, and the ways in which governance structures shape the lived or the lives of marginalized communities, especially women and children. So Tizo, over to you for your opening remarks.
Okay, thank you, Madam Program Director. Greetings to you all. As introduced, my name is Tizo Hoe. I'm a student at Rhodes University. It's situated in the Eastern Cape in South Africa. So I think just to preface, or the way that I almost like saw this conversation happening, I wanted it to split into 2 different things. So my role and impact at Rhodes University, but also like assessing my impact as a student and broader society. So for me, I'm Zimbabwean. I was born there, but I was raised in South Africa. And now I go to Rhodes University. And I think what we see on social media or technology facilitated gender-based violence, I think it's actually a reflection of the society that we live in. Because I think, when I look back at my university campus and, some of the sexism or gender or GBV that we experience via the social media apps, which I think is the most prevalent on campus, I think it's something that's, also seen within, the homes that we're in, within the conversations that we have with our friends. So I don't necessarily want us to divorce the reality of, the society that we live in and also then what's happening on social media or now what's playing out on social media. So I think for me, when I was looking at, where I can see an example of when gender-based or technology gender-based violence has really occurred is, this reoccurrence of these confession pages that we have at university level. To my understanding, they're possibly at every university in the country and probably continentally. And I think a lot of the times, the rhetoric that you see that pops up on those confessions, it's quite shocking because you'll see things from, accusing people of having, STDs to, accusing, women of being loose to accusing, people of homosexuality. So I think in the sense that a lot of the times these pages go unregulated, they're also very anonymous. So people also then can't, be accountable or held accountable to their words. So I think they can be very disruptive to how we also engage with each other, in real life, because they have had real life ramifications in terms of, how now people actually view the individuals that, were confessed about on those pages. So I think better regulations could definitely help. But I think to also like pull on to how I think it's become a safe space for, bigots or people that have, bigoted views to now, openly express, but also be reaffirmed by them. Because I think to some extent, you can also find a community that shares, similar sentiments online, and it's so much easier because now it's not just your small geographical location, but you can find people that can reaffirm the violence that you want to perpetrate against a certain group. So I think for me, I can even see it in this Zimbabwean example when you see people, female politicians, and when you then go into the comments of sections of, be it Facebook or Twitter, you'll be, these women are, accused of whoring, or these women are, sorry for my language, but I think it's definitely something that's, I don't want to divorce the idea of what's happening in real life doesn't happen on social media, or what's happening on social media doesn't happen in real life. So I think for me, where I believe that where we could do better is, first of all, I think, universities are always a microcosm of the society that we live in, and we shouldn't divorce them from the society that we live in. And also universities should be a social actor of transformative change. So for me, I think we need to start having conversations around social media literacy and even, awareness. I think we just did in the poll that I think a lot of the times people suffer from awareness of what, technology, gender-based violence is, because we don't necessarily have the language or the articulation of it, right? You can think, oh, okay, my boyfriend, happened to make a horrible status about me, but I wouldn't necessarily, deem that abusive or even violent in a sense, because it's just, it's online, like it's not something that I can touch. So I think in terms of, making sure that we have more awareness, and even as Prof was saying at the beginning, I think we do need to work more with our student leaders on campus, especially to bring awareness to our student bodies, so then they can also have the articulations and then know where to find help. So, for example, at Rose University, I would say we've got a very robust system of how we deal with sexual harassment, or even, things of harassment cases in general. And I think if you're able to at least, arm people with the knowledge of, oh, I can recognize that this was gender-based violence, or this is what happened to me, and then then they approach those mechanisms in the university, because they do exist. But I just don't think we've made people aware enough, or students aware enough of how the routes or the avenues. So I think maybe the conversation needs to be at a student level, that we do need to work more on the ground, closer to the student body, in terms of context specific, also cultural specific tools, where we can also understand, okay, how do we engage and interact with each other on these social media platforms, and also what are its impacts on ensuring that we can have better conducive dialogue.
Thank you so much, Tizo, for your opening remarks. And what I'd like to do is to just encourage our audience to please continue to engage in the chat. So please, as the students are sharing their perspectives, feel free to drop in the chat your reflections, your questions, and interact with us as we go along. I'd like to introduce the next student, who is Vincent Ochieng from University of Kabianga. And he's a final year Bachelor of Education Science student at the university and a passionate gender equality activist, also championing sustainable development. He's chairperson of the University of Kabianga Gender Club and actively led initiatives to create a safer environment for students. So I think we'll hear a lot from Vincent, and I've been seeing his interaction in the chat. Vincent, over to you.
Thank you, Joy. I think I'm very clear. So thank you. I'm very excited to join this conversation to challenge the issues to do with the technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Just as I've been introduced, I am a final year student from the University of Kabianga in Kenya. So this issue of gender-based violence, when it is related to technology-facilitated, it is not just a small issue as we are taking it to be, because its impacts are rooted deeply to the physical real world, because you get that some of the impacts that somebody face online are going back to their studies, their mental health, and also we can say how they relate with people. So when I can just give a short example of what has happened during my tenure when I was the chair for Gender Club, there is this lady who was right in politics, and abruptly, because in campus we are socializing, and due to some issues, they happened to break up with one of his his boyfriend in a relationship. So we used to have something like intimate partner violence. Now it happened online, where the partner collide with the colleague to share some of the private images of her, and maybe use some images to make it so deep so that she could not even talk online. So this issue is not something that we could not avoid talking about, because it has affected most of the people. It has affected both the genders. I'm very interested about the conversation that is going on, where men are just saying that they are left behind. But it is not that, it's not that case, because when we get it to the context where both of us are affected, you get that when we talk about men, they are affected. When we talk about women, they are affected. So it is an issue which is a collective agreement, where we need to all come together to really look at it. Now, this issue has had impact to us students on our academic performance, where you get that majority of the students cannot even join this online platform because they are afraid of what it may cost to them. They are very afraid that out of this engagement, they can also be shamed, they can also be exposed because of what recently happened to them. Now, we have to appreciate our universities, because they are trying to make some of the things under the ground, which are at least helping us to know that there is help, even if they are limited. For instance, when I talk about the University of Kabianga, and I know majority of the university are also doing a lot, we have this kind of basic policies in terms of code of conduct, which we are putting in place as the administration. They are putting in place in liaison with the students to help them, that when they face this, what they can they do. And also we have some of the disciplinary action that can be taken to the perpetrators of this violence. Now, in addition to that, we also have some campaign awareness about this issue, which we have them, but they are not enough. We need to add more. But being that is happening, we still have some gap when it comes to advocating, or when it comes to awareness about technology facilitated gender-based violence, where we get that most institutions, they are just reactive, but they are not proactive. What do I mean by that? They are just reacting to the immediate thing that have happened, but they are not putting in strategies to come up with a real or a long-term effect, or a long-term prevention measures that will help to prevent this tech violence to a wider range. Apart from that, we know very well that our universities, they are facing some limitation in terms of finance. Now we get that this support in terms of mental health, the mental health support, they are not there. We get that in a whole university where the population is 12,000 and above, we have only one counselor, and this counselor is not trained to deal with aspects to do with technology facilitated gender-based violence. Now, that is the problem. They are not trained to handle that. Apart from that, the staff and maybe the faculty members, they are not aware of this incident to do with gender-based violence when it comes to technology. Maybe if I could just talk in the perspective of a student, what are some of the things that I think are best that if university admins could do, and in collaboration with the students, they could do. This is some of the changes that could be made, or some of the impacts that could be made in the life of students, so that they could not stop living in this fear, that they cannot even attend online platform based on the advancement in technology. So one of the things that I could suggest, because I know there is a lot of people, administrators from different universities here, what I could support or what I could urge is maybe we could have student-led advocacy hubs, where we give the students to have peer-to-peer workshop where they can teach themselves about the issues to do with technology facilitated gender-based violence and the digital safety. Also have some groups where they can advocate, so that the awareness that we are talking about as a gap can be filled up. Second to that, maybe if we could have clear institutional policies where we have confidential reporting, we can have collaboration. And also, if I could end my presentation, we could advocate for specialized services where we invest more on the mental health specialists who can help us to really navigate after going through this, because we have a lot of trauma that are purely related to this technology facilitated gender-based violence. Not after that trauma, we need after services. And as I end is that maybe influence legislation, as Chieng said about that, maybe have a collaboration between the university itself and other university so that we can really deal with this violence, because violence, it is happening online. So you are not assured that it is going to happen between university. It may be outside university, or even those people who are outside university. So we need to really advocate for this influencing policy and legislation change, and also maybe have this report and a screenshot of evidence of what has happened. Now, thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I think that was really insightful. And I want to share actually a comment that was put into the chat, which I think really aligns with a lot of what you were sharing. And the chat is from Victoria Buffalo, which says, I wish to highlight that broader discussions on GBVF and gender equality ought to also address mental health, substance abuse, and sexual harassment, ensuring that the experiences of the LGBTQIA+ community are not overlooked, especially in the context of cyberbullying and the absence of robust institutional policies. So the importance of empowering all individuals, really, and that it requires a holistic approach that connects safety, well-being, and equality. Thank you so much for that contribution, Victoria. I couldn't agree more. And I think it really supports a lot of what has been shared thus far by Tsidzo and by Vincent. What I'd like to do now is to move on to our next student leader, who is a vocal advocate for gender equality and sexual and reproductive health. I firmly believe, she says, that young people, especially students, should be at the forefront of social change. And I think we're seeing that today already, that these young leaders are at the forefront. I mean, some of the recommendations that they're coming up with in terms of mechanisms and ways to address the issue are really strong and just need capacitating. So with a strong commitment to advancing technology-driven solutions and leveraging AI and metadata, Valentine actively explores how digital tools can be utilized to address pressing issues such as gender-based violence, climate change, and inequality. Valentine, I welcome you on stage. Please go ahead and unmute and you can share.
Thank you so much, everyone. For many of us, internet is an extension to our campus lives as students. And this is a platform where we connect, we build communities, and where we mostly learn. Yeah. So like, I want to use an example of a woman, young lady in the university who is a voice to others, who is shameless, who is a leader, let's say. But now this lady is filmed or recorded by the boyfriend having, in the intimate moments. And then the guy goes ahead and posts it after a breakup or an argument. So this affects the lady, not just online. Your friends will tell you, oh, this will go off, this will brush off, or people will forget. But you as a person, you can't walk out there when you know something confidential, like video or a photo of you is out there. The internet never forgets. People will always have that, and they'll always use against you. You can't go up again without shame, like go talk to people. They'll start shaming you. You'll feel isolated. You won't go to classes. You might even drop out if you're not so confident or courageous. Yeah, so technology facilitated abuse is a real problem in our universities, and we need to act on it. Yeah. So for the universities, especially my university, I see they have like reporting systems, but they are poorly advertised. So I would urge them to make sure that these systems are well known by the students, and for peers, ourselves, we need to support the victims or the perpetrated. We need to support them. We need to call out the harmful behaviors. We need to stand by them as they're facing this and see that they are not alone in this. Yeah, we could also have the advocacy for like digital literacy, so that people know the responsible online use, and so that people know their rights, so that students are well informed and those who are affected can speak out instead of being silent. As a tech student pursuing a bachelor's in computer science, I would also go to the way the internet platforms, how are they ensuring that such things are not happening across their platforms? So I would urge innovators to be more inclusive, make sure that if you're building something, it doesn't it minimizes the chances that someone is going to be abused on your platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valentine. And I think you touched on something that we didn't say a lot about today, which is the issue of that line, which can be very thin because of how we're socialized, how a lot has been normalized, which is not actually okay. And so that inability to recognize when a line has been crossed or when you have experienced a violation. So I think it's a very valid point. What I'd like to now do before we wrap up is to share a few final questions with our students, and then we can end off and ensure that we do complete our session on time. So I'll start off in the order that they spoke. So I'll go to you, Tsidzo. In your parting thoughts, what message do you want university leaders and policymakers to hear and act on today?
Okay, thank you, Madam Program Director. So I think for me, as I've said, I think, universities are a microcosm of our greater society. And I think I'd like to see student leaders be more ethical actors of transformative change in society, right? Which means, I think, also engaging with civil society and not just, limiting it to our university spaces. Because as we said that, like, technology, social media, it's something that's, it's borderless, it's something that you can't necessarily stop in a geographical location. I could stop it at roads, but, people still engage and interact with people from other universities and other spaces. So for me, I would like us to be more conscious of, the societies that we come from, the communities that we come from, and the role that we play in them. I think for us to even engage on, national conversations or even continental conversations, I think there was a mention of the AU's mission or, activities in terms of, propping up legislature that actively, also then addresses issues of technology-based, gender-based violence. Because even if we look at, the younger students that will come into university spaces, they also will probably have the same issues or issues that are far greater than this. So I think it's also just understanding that we play not only a role or responsibility to our university spaces, but also play a role and responsibility to our greater communities. And it can start off with making people aware, engaging with leaders within our universities or within our community spaces. So I think it needs to be a shared effort, and we shouldn't necessarily want to gatekeep or monopolize any of the efforts when it comes to technology, gender-based violence. And I'd like us to be more intentional about actually engaging with one another and not just keeping it within our spaces that we all operate within.
Thank you so much. And I'd now like to move over to you, Vincent. And perhaps this will be slightly controversial given the conversations that have been taking place in the chat today, but I wanted to ask from a male student's perspective, how can male students become allies in this fight? And what role does masculinity play in perpetuating or ending online abuse?
All right, thank you, Joy, for that wonderful question about the role of the male student when it comes to advocating or when it comes to them aligning or making some changes when it comes to these issues of tech violence. Now, we have a great role, but the first thing we need just to change our mindset. by changing our mindset and understanding that this is not a fight. We are not fighting between the ladies, and we are not fighting between the ladies and the gentlemen. By just understanding that, we are well to go. And this thing should be a conversation, because when we understand that this same person that we are really a victim of tech violence is your sister, let us own it, that the person you are really perpetuating online is your sister, or the person you are perpetuating online is your brother. I think we will be at a well pace to really fight or to really raise awareness about the issues to do with the technology facilitated gender-based violence. But the problem is that as a student, we have always there to know that we are fighting each other, that women are being empowered more than us. So we need to make them go down. We need to make them not succeed in leadership. We need to make them any opportunity that we get. We really make it so that they cannot proceed. So let us own everything that we have. Just as I end, I'll say that silent is not an option. Silent is not an option to us. And let us start by having a conversation with friends. Let us have conversation with the peers. And also, I believe by raising awareness, we are going to align our policies. We are going to align our advocacy work to make sure that each and everything that we do is aiming at fighting and breaking the silence to add technology facilitated gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent. And I think it goes back to that conversation that was shared by Prof. Anita earlier on about the importance or the role of bystanders, that we should be more active bystanders. So sometimes you're part of a conversation where your peers are saying the wrong things. And it's important that we find means and ways to start raising our own voice around what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And so I'd like to now move on to our final student panelist, Valentine. What peer-led solutions or advocacy responses are you finding are emerging within your own university or other universities that you would recommend we take forward?
Thank you so much for that question and for this opportunity. The peer-led advocacies I'm seeing in our institutions, okay, most of them relate to mental health, because this issue with technology facilitated abuse most affects students' mental health by causing anxiety or low self-esteem or depression mostly. So I see some student-led clubs and societies where people go and talk. I've seen the student-led advocacy on digital safety, and where people come together to learn how to be safe online or on the internet. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Valentine. And as we wind down, I'd like to just make time for a final poll, and then we can share our closing remarks. So Tech, if you can assist me with putting up our final poll. And the poll says, what would make students feel safer online? And this in the context of a comment that just came in now, which I don't think we'll have enough time to engage at the moment, around the alarming rate of gender-based violence and femicide in particular by intimate partners, and specifically the mention was from Kenya. So what would make students feel safer online? Is it stronger university policies and reporting systems? Is it peer-led support networks? Maybe digital literacy and awareness programs, or collaboration with tech platforms? And of course, there'll be an option for other, because I'm certain others will have different ideas of what the solutions could be. What would make you as a student feel safer online? Stronger university policies and reporting systems, peer-led support networks, digital literacy and awareness programs, or collaboration with tech platforms? Please do go ahead and submit your response, and let's see where we land in the poll. I love this. In the comment, it says we need an option for all the above, and I actually agree with you. But it seems there's been a consistent theme from the start of the session to now, where we're citing that there is a requirement for stronger university policies and reporting systems, that we need to have the right mechanisms in place that are survivor-oriented to ensure that people can boldly, without fear of retaliation, go ahead and report, and that there are means for them to get the requisite support. Digital literacy and awareness programs also came up quite high. Reason being, I think we've cited from the onset, a lot of institutions, a lot of students feel there isn't enough information being circulated around these issues. So thank you very much for sharing your feedback in the poll. I would like to take this opportunity to wind down the conversation. And as we wrap up, my first thing is to just thank all of our panelists, and especially our student voices, for sharing so openly with us today. Tech-facilitated GBV is a growing challenge, but with collective awareness, with advocacy and institutional commitment, we can build safer and more inclusive campuses. I'd like to invite you all, students, academics, policymakers, and partners, to join the Shared Value Africa team and continental allies in a united call to action. Let us use this knowledge as a catalyst to transform policies, to invest in student-led discussions and solutions, to foster respect in every aspect of the digital environment, even physical corners of our university. So thank you for the participation and commitment. I invite you to stay engaged, to stay vocal, and let's work together to silence violence and to amplify equality. On behalf of the Shared Value Africa Gender Equality Unit, I'd like to say thank you for joining us. We wish you a pleasant remainder of the day. Thank you so much.